Step inside an Infiniti M30 in 1990-something, and immediately it felt off. Leather and wood surrounded you, but the dashboard betrayed a secret. You were staring at a ghost, a gauge cluster mirrored from a Nissan Skyline, years out of place. This was not a parts bin mistake. It was a clue, a hint about the car's true identity that we will solve by the end. The M30 was never meant to be an Infiniti. It was a disguise for a Japanese icon, smuggled into America under a false name. While the Q45 looked like the future, the M30 looked like the past. To understand why, we start with the bubble that birthed it. The late 1980s in Japan were a time of absolute madness. They called it the bubble era. Property values in Tokyo were so high that the Imperial Palace grounds were rumored to be worth more than the entire state of California. Car manufacturers had budgets that seemed bottomless. Engineers were told to build the best, regardless of cost. In this atmosphere of infinite optimism, Nissan developed a car called the Leopard. It was the F31 chassis, a sophisticated Grand Tourer built strictly for the domestic Japanese market. It shared its mechanical bones with the R31 Skyline, a car revered for its engineering. The Leopard was designed to eat up miles of highway in total comfort. It was sharp, angular, and unapologetically Japanese. It was the car for the successful salaryman who wanted to project an image of understated power. This was during a time when the yen was surging, and corporate profits were at record highs. There was a sense that the party would never end. The Leopard reflected this. It was built with a level of material quality that only exists when accountants are looking the other way. It even hid a piece of suspension technology so advanced it felt like science fiction, and we will get to that engineering marvel later. Meanwhile, in the United States, a war was brewing. The American luxury market was about to be turned upside down. Toyota was preparing to launch Lexus with the LS400, a car that terrified every executive in Detroit and Stuttgart. Honda had already established a foothold with Acura. Nissan knew they needed a premium brand to compete. They poured resources into the Infiniti Q45, a massive, powerful sedan designed to challenge the Germans directly. It was a technological marvel. However, a car company cannot survive on one model alone. A dealership with a single car on the floor looks empty. It looks risky. They needed a showroom companion. They needed a coupe to sit alongside the sedan to offer a different entry point into the brand. But developing a new luxury car from scratch takes 5 years and costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Nissan did not have the time. The clock was ticking toward the 1990 launch, and the showrooms had to be full. So executives looked deeply into their domestic lineup. They saw the Leopard. It was handsome. It was proven. And most importantly, it was already finished. The decision was made to take this Japanese icon, rebadge it, and ship it to America as the Infiniti M30. It was a pragmatic choice, born entirely from urgency. They took a car designed for the narrow streets of Tokyo and the Shuto Expressway and thrust it onto the wide boulevards of Los Angeles. This was a cost-saving maneuver, but it was also a gamble. By choosing to rebadge an existing platform, rather than developing a ground-up mid-size luxury coupe, Nissan locked the M30 into a specific destiny. It meant the car arrived in American ports in 1990 with engineering that actually dated back to the mid-80s. While the Q45 had a modern V8 and organic curves, the M30 had the upright, boxy stance of a previous era. It was a timeline collision. You had a brand new luxury marquee launching with 1 foot in the future and 1 foot firmly planted in the past. This origin story explains the confusing nature of the car. It explains why a vehicle marketed as the cutting edge of luxury felt so familiar to those who knew their history. It was a stopgap measure that accidentally preserved a very specific moment in Japanese manufacturing. This decision did more than just determine the badge on the hood. It dictated the physical form of the car and the entire philosophy of the interior. The interior design language of the M30 was a defiance of the coming aerodynamic age. While competitors were beginning to experiment with organic shapes and driver-centric cockpits that wrapped around the pilot like a fighter jet, the M30 remained steadfastly architectural. The dashboard was a wide, horizontal cliff face. It stretched from pillar to pillar in a straight line, emphasizing width and stability rather than speed. It was not trying to be sporty, it was trying to be substantial. This brings us back to that ghost in the machine. The dashboard architecture was indeed the R31 Skyline layout, simply mirrored for left-hand drive markets. But in this context, it took on a different meaning. In the Skyline, it was functional. In the Infiniti, it became a statement of analog clarity. The gauges were large, circular, and incredibly legible. There were no digital readouts trying to dazzle the driver with calculator graphics. There were just white needles on black faces, moving with a precise, damped weight. It was information presented without theater. The tactile experience of this cabin is what truly separates it from modern luxury. Today, drivers are used to capacitive touchscreens and piano black plastic that feels hollow to the tap. The M30 came from the era of the switch. Every function had a dedicated physical button. When you pressed the button for the rear defrost or the hazard lights, you felt a mechanical engagement. There was a spring-loaded resistance, a distinct click, and a release. It was satisfying in a way that tapping a glass screen can never be. The climate control sliders moved with a hydraulic-like resistance, suggesting that there was heavy machinery moving deep behind the dashboard. Then there was the silence. The engineers in Japan had a specific word for the atmosphere they wanted to create: hushed. They did not just want to dampen wind noise, they wanted to erase the mechanical violence of the road. They used heavy sound-deadening materials throughout the floor and the firewall. The result was a cabin that felt pressurized, like an aircraft. When the windows were up, the outside world became a silent movie. This isolation was a key part of the luxury definition at the time. You were not supposed to feel the road, you were supposed to float above it. To justify the price tag, which hovered around $23,000, Infiniti decided to make almost everything standard. There was no confusing options list where the buyer had to pay extra for floor mats or a radio. The car came with a power-sliding moonroof. It came with a high-end Bose audio system that was specifically tuned for the acoustic signature of that cabin. The seats were upholstered in leather that feels distinct from what is used today. It was thicker, with a grain that felt like it came from an animal rather than a laboratory. The seats were not designed to hold you in place during a high-G corner. They were designed to support you during a 3-hour commute. This philosophy extended to the visibility. Because the roof pillars were thin and upright, a hallmark of 80s design that safety regulations would soon kill off, the greenhouse was airy. One could see out in every direction. It made the cabin feel larger than it actually was. It was a space designed for human beings, not for aerodynamics. It was the final expression of a specific kind of Japanese hospitality, where the car served the driver with polite, unobtrusive competence. It felt solid. It felt permanent. However, this serene environment created a deceptive contrast. While the driver sat in a leather-wrapped cocoon of silence, enjoying the high-fidelity audio and the clear view of the road, the machinery underneath was telling a different story. The cabin promised a futuristic, high-tech experience of effortless motion, but the engineering that actually moved the car down the road was about to reveal the limitations of that recycled platform. To understand the soul of the M30, you have to look past the leather and open the hood. What you found there was not a high-revving, multi-valve screamer designed to chase Porsches on the Autobahn. Instead, you found the VG30E. This was a 3.0-liter, single overhead cam, V6 engine. In the hierarchy of Nissan engineering, this was the reliable workhorse, not the thoroughbred. It was an engine cast from iron, designed with 2 valves per cylinder at a time when the rest of the world was rapidly moving to 4. It was the same power plant found in the Maxima sedan and the Pathfinder truck. Its presence in a luxury flagship coupe speaks volumes about what this car was actually trying to be. The choice of this engine defined the entire driving character of the vehicle. It produced 162 horsepower. In 1990, that number was respectable but hardly earth-shattering. However, the way it delivered that power was crucial. The single overhead cam design meant that the engine was not interested in rushing to the red line. It made its torque low in the rev range. It was designed to pull away from a stoplight with a deep, effortless surge rather than a frantic buzz. It was an engine built for the traffic jam and the boulevard cruiser, prioritizing silence and durability over adrenaline. It was impossible to brake, but it was also impossible to hustle. When you put your foot down, the result was a polite increase in velocity rather than a shove in the back. The sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour took nearly 10 seconds. By the standards of the early 90s sports coupe market, this was an eternity. The Acura Legend Coupe was faster. The Lexus SC 400, which would arrive shortly after, was in a different galaxy of performance. But the M30 was not trying to win a drag race. It was trying to maintain its composure. The transmission was a willing partner in this relaxed approach. It used a 4-speed automatic gearbox that was programmed to shift as imperceptibly as possible. It would slide from gear to gear with a slushy, gentle engagement that ensured the coffee in the cup holder never spilled. But while the powertrain was decidedly old school, the suspension system was hiding a piece of technology that felt like it had come out of a science fiction novel. Infiniti called it Sonar Suspension 2. In an era before magnetic ride control or camera-based active suspension became common in six-figure supercars, this humble coupe was attempting to read the road. Tucked under the front bumper was an ultrasonic sensor that constantly emitted sound waves at the road surface as the car drove over it. The sensor scanned the asphalt for imperfections, potholes, and bumps. When the sonar sensor detected a change in the road surface, it sent a signal to a computer which then instantly adjusted the actuators sitting on top of the shock absorbers. If the road was rough, the suspension would soften to absorb the impact. If the road was smooth, or the car was cornering, it would firm up to provide stability. It was a closed-loop system of road-reading intelligence that happened in milliseconds. This was the technological luxury that Infiniti was betting on. They were using Silicon Valley thinking to solve the mechanical problem of ride quality. The result was a car that floated. The suspension smoothed out expansion joints and broken pavement on American highways with an eerie effectiveness. It disconnected the driver from the road surface, which was exactly the point. The steering was light and overboosted, requiring only a fingertip to guide the car. The brakes were adequate but lacked the bite of a sports car. Everything about the engineering was tuned to lower the driver's pulse rate. It was a philosophy of isolation. This created a fascinating dichotomy under the skin of the M30. On one hand, you had a drivetrain that was essentially agricultural in its simplicity, an iron block VG30 V6, and a 4-speed automatic that could run for 300,000 miles with basic maintenance. On the other hand, you had a suspension system so complex it used sonar waves to decide how firm the shock absorbers should be. It was a mix of the proven past and the experimental future. It was a car that would never leave you stranded, but would constantly adjust itself to keep you comfortable. As the coupe settled into the market, however, it became clear that this blend of modest power and high-tech comfort was a hard sell in a segment that was becoming obsessed with horsepower and handling statistics. The M30 was too slow to be a sports car and too small to be a limousine. Infiniti needed to do something to grab the American public's attention. They needed to add a layer of romance to this pragmatic Japanese cruiser. And so, just 1 year into its life, they decided to perform a radical structural transformation that would change the car's identity completely. By 1991, Infiniti realized that the M30 Coupe was in danger of becoming invisible. The initial excitement had faded, and the car was sitting in showrooms, overshadowed by the futuristic Q45 sedan. The brand needed glamour. They needed something that would catch the eye of the casual observer cruising down the Pacific Coast Highway. The solution was the M30 convertible, but Nissan did not build convertibles at the factory in Japan. The logistics required to bring this car to life were a testament to the money is no object mindset of the bubble era that was just starting to fade. The process was a logistical nightmare of inefficiency. Every single M30 convertible started its life as a fully finished steel roof coupe on the assembly line in Japan. It was built, painted, and completed with all its glass and trim. Then it was driven onto a boat and shipped thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean to the port of San Pedro in California. From the port, the brand new cars were trucked to a facility run by ASC McLaren. ASC was the legendary American sunroof company that had made a name for itself chopping the tops off Mustangs and Caprices. For the M30, their job was brutal. They took a saw to the roof of a perfectly good luxury car. They cut off the steel pillars and removed the rear glass. But you cannot simply cut the roof off a unibody car without consequences. The roof is a structural bridge that keeps the car from twisting. Without it, the chassis becomes weak. To fix this, ASC had to weld heavy steel reinforcements into the rocker panels and the floor. They practically rebuilt the chassis from the waist down to regain some rigidity. This manual surgery added significant weight to a car that was already heavy. But deeper than the structural changes, it forced a bizarre downgrade to the interior, a specific luxury feature that actually made the more expensive convertible less advanced than the coupe. The most obvious change was in the center console. The coupe featured a high-tech, digital automatic climate control system. It was a hallmark of the car's luxury status, allowing the driver to set a temperature and forget it. But in the convertible, that digital unit was gone. In its place were simple analog sliders. The heavy bracing required for the convertible conversion likely interfered with the complex ducting or wiring of the automatic system, forcing a return to basics. It was a strange downgrade for a car that cost significantly more than the coupe. Then there was the roof itself. It was a high-quality canvas top, operated by a single button, but the rear window was plastic. There was no glass, and there was no defroster. Over time, the sun would turn that clear plastic into a cloudy, yellow haze, a common affliction for convertibles of that era. It was a maintenance headache that owners of the coupe never had to worry about. But perhaps the most fascinating detail of the convertible was hidden in the speakers. The engineers knew that the extra weight of the steel reinforcements made the car even slower. They could not make the engine more powerful, so they decided to make it sound more powerful. The convertible came standard with a special Bose Active Sound audio system. This was not just for playing jazz cassettes. The system actually used a microphone and the car's speakers to manipulate the acoustic environment. It piped a tuned frequency of engine noise into the cabin to make the V6 sound throatier and more aggressive than it actually was. It was an early analog version of the fake engine noise that is common in cars today. They were trying to trick the driver's ears into believing the car had a sporting soul, even as the heavy chassis struggled to keep up with traffic. Despite these efforts to Americanize the car, the competitive landscape was shifting faster than Nissan could adapt. The Infiniti M30 was not just fighting for market share, it was fighting a war against the passage of time. When the car was conceived on the drafting tables in Japan during the mid-80s, its design language was the height of fashion. It was the era of origami styling, where a ruler was the designer's most important tool. Cars were defined by sharp creases, flat planes, and geometric precision. By the time the M30 actually arrived in American showrooms in 1990, the world had changed completely. The 1990s introduced a new design philosophy that the industry called bio-design. Suddenly, the ruler was thrown away in favor of the curve. You could see this shift happening in real time on the streets. In 1991, Lexus unveiled the SC400. It was a shock to the system. That car looked like it had been molded from liquid metal or smoothed by a river stone. It had no straight lines. It was aerodynamic, organic, and aggressively modern. Honda followed suit with the Acura Legend Coupe, a car that managed to be both sleek and muscular. Parked next to these fluid wind tunnel-shaped machines, the M30 looked like a visiting dignitary from a different decade. Its upright grille, its tall greenhouse, and its boxy silhouette made it look instantly antique. It was a tuxedo in a room full of wetsuits. This visual disconnect was made worse by the pricing strategy. Infiniti had placed the M30 in a dangerous middle ground. It was priced around $25,000, depending on the year and the options. This was too expensive to be an entry-level sporty coupe for the youth market, but it was not prestigious enough to steal buyers away from the German giants. It sat in a strange no-man's land. To make matters worse, the greatest threat to the M30 came from inside its own house. If a customer walked into an Infiniti Nissan dealership Twoplex in 1991, they would see the M30 sitting on one side of the floor. On the other side, under the Nissan banner, sat the new 300ZX. The Z car was a technological tour de force. It was faster, it handled better, it looked like a spaceship, and it cost roughly the same amount of money. The M30 simply could not compete with its own sibling. This internal cannibalization was compounded by the lack of options. In Japan, the Leopard could be ordered with a turbocharged engine that gave it some serious teeth. But for the American market, Infiniti decided that luxury meant passive. They denied the M30 the turbocharger. They denied it a manual transmission. They cemented its image as a car for people who did not really care about driving. It was a cruiser, pure and simple, in an era where performance luxury was becoming the new standard. Then came the economic reality that sealed its fate. The Japanese asset bubble, which had fueled the development of these cars, burst with catastrophic force in 1991 and 1992. The infinite budgets vanished overnight. Nissan, like every other Japanese manufacturer, suddenly found itself in a financial crisis. In the boom years, they could afford to keep a low-volume niche coupe in the lineup just for variety. But in the recession that followed, every model had to earn its keep. There was no room for sentimentality. There was no money to redesign the M30 to make it competitive with the Lexus SC. The decision was to cut losses rather than invest in a direct successor. The M30 had been a stopgap from the beginning, a way to hold ground until the brand found its footing. But the ground shifted beneath them. The market moved toward rounder shapes and more power, and the economy moved toward austerity. The M30 was on the wrong side of both trends. It was a car built for a moment of optimism that had already passed. So, just 3 years after it appeared, the M30 was quietly pulled from the lineup. It faded from showrooms almost as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a legacy defined not by sales figures, but by mechanical endurance. The ownership experience of an Infiniti M30 in the modern era is defined by a sharp divide between mechanical invincibility and cosmetic fragility. Those who bought these cars new discovered that the very thing critics complained about, the ancient engineering, was actually the car's greatest long-term asset. The VG30E engine block is widely regarded by mechanics as one of the most durable engines Nissan ever produced. It is an iron lump that simply refuses to die. Because it was not stressed to produce high horsepower, and because it lacked complex turbochargers or multi-valve heads, it operates with low thermal stress. It is not uncommon to find M30s with well over 200,000 miles on the odometer, still running smoothly with the original head gaskets and transmission. The drivetrain is bulletproof, a testament to the over-engineering of Japanese industrial products from the 80s. This mechanical simplicity creates a unique parts bin advantage for the modern owner. If an alternator fails, or a starter motor gives up, or a water pump starts to leak, the owner does not need to hunt for rare parts from a defunct manufacturer. They can simply walk into any auto parts store and ask for components for a 1990 Nissan Maxima or a Pathfinder. The internal organs of the M30 are shared with hundreds of thousands of other Nissan vehicles sold in America. This interchangeability keeps these cars alive. It allows them to be serviced by any mechanic with a basic set of tools. There are no exotic computers that require proprietary software to diagnose. It is a luxury car that can be fixed in a driveway on a Sunday afternoon. But there is a catch. While the mechanics are invincible, every owner lives with a specific calculated risk. One minor mistake can instantly turn this running, driving luxury car into a total loss. The M30 suffers from what enthusiasts call Unobtanium syndrome. Because the car was sold in such low numbers, only about 12,000 units in total, over 3 years, there is zero aftermarket support for the body. If a driver is involved in a minor fender bender that crunches a headlight or cracks a bumper, the car is effectively totaled. There are no replacement fenders sitting in a warehouse. There are no reproduction grills being stamped out in a factory somewhere. Owners are forced to scour junkyards and internet forums, hunting for the carcass of another M30 to harvest parts from. A broken taillight lens can become a 6-month search. This scarcity turns every drive into a calculated risk. The interior also holds specific challenges that date the car to its exact moment in history. One of the most sought-after accessories for collectors is the original dealer installed cellular phone. In 1990, this was the ultimate status symbol. It was a heavy, brick-sized handset, usually mounted on a pedestal to the right of the center console, tethered by a thick coiled cord. It cost thousands of dollars when new. Today it is a dead piece of technology, a paperweight that connects to a network that no longer exists. Yet, owners fight to keep them installed because they perfectly capture the aspiration of the era. Similarly, the sunroof wind deflector, a dark-smoked plastic shield that clipped onto the roof, is a rare period accessory that screams early 90s styling. Unfortunately, the enemies of the M30 are not just traffic accidents, but the elements themselves. Like many Japanese cars of this vintage, the steel was not rust-proofed to modern standards. The rocker panels, particularly on the convertibles where the chassis flexes, are prone to rot. The rear wheel arches bubble up and slowly dissolve into red dust. This physical decay claims more M30s than mechanical failure ever does. Finding a clean, rust-free example today is exceptionally difficult. Most have been consumed by oxidation or neglected until their unique trim pieces fell off. They are vanishing rapidly. This scarcity has created a strange dynamic, where the car is mechanically ready for another decade of service but physically disintegrating. It leads to a dedicated, if small, cult of preservationists who see value in the struggle. Beyond the mechanics, the car holds a cultural significance that varies wildly depending on which side of the Pacific you are on. If you mention the Infiniti M30 at a car show in California today, you will likely be met with a confused shrug or a vague recollection of a boxy coupe from the 90s. In North America, the car is an obscure footnote, a placeholder that existed briefly before the brand found its true identity. The M30 is defined by obscurity, but if you cross the Pacific to Japan, the narrative changes violently. There, the chassis code F31 is not forgotten. It is worshipped. The car is a celebrity. This difference in status is fueled almost entirely by a television phenomenon that Americans never saw. In the late 80s, Japanese television aired a police procedural called Abunai Deika, or Dangerous Detectives. It was a cultural juggernaut, often described as Japan's answer to Miami Vice. The show featured two stylish, rule-breaking detectives running the streets of Yokohama. Their partner in fighting crime was not a Ferrari Testarossa, but a gold Nissan Leopard. For millions of Japanese viewers, this car was the ultimate symbol of cool. It was the hero car that drifted around corners and chased down the Yakuza. Seeing a Leopard in Japan today evokes the same visceral nostalgia that a DeLorean or a Trans Am does in the United States. It is inseparable from the pop culture of the bubble era. This context explains the tragedy of the American M30. When Infiniti imported the car, they stripped it of this cultural armor. They took a vehicle that was designed to be a swaggering, detective-driven icon and marketed it as a sensible, quiet luxury coupe for accountants. They removed the context that made it cool. Without the Abunai Deika connection, Americans just saw an expensive Nissan with dated styling. They did not know they were looking at the Ferrari of Yokohama. They just saw a car that looked like it belonged in a parking lot from 1986. The identity crisis of the M30 is physically stamped onto the hardware of the final model year. If you open the hood of a 1990 or a 1991 model, the plastic cover on the intake plenum proudly displays the Nissan logo. It was an honest admission of its origins. But for 1992, the final year of production, the company made a subtle, almost desperate change. They retooled the plastic mold. The final cars feature an engine cover with the Infiniti logo cast into the plastic. It was a last-minute attempt to claim the car for the luxury brand, a final assertion of identity just before the model was killed off. When the end came, it was absolute. The M30 was replaced by the Infiniti J30, a car that could not have been more different. The J30 was known in Japan as the Leopard J Ferrier, but it abandoned the razor-edge styling of the F31 entirely. It embraced the bio-design trend with a sloping trunk and a rounded Jaguar-like profile. It looked like a jelly bean. The arrival of the J30 effectively erased the M30's lineage. It signaled that the era of the square-jawed, upright Japanese GT car was over. The architectural dashboard was replaced by sweeping curves and wood trim that looked like furniture. The feeling of mechanical solidity was replaced by fluid organic softness. This makes the M30 a capsule of peak analog. It represents a specific moment in manufacturing history where luxury meant isolation and heft. It was built before cost-cutting measures began to hollow out the interiors of Japanese cars in the mid-90s. The buttons in an M30 feel heavy because they are heavy. The door closes with a thud because it is packed with steel and sound deadening. It is a machine from a time when engineers believed that quality was something you could feel in your fingertips, not something you displayed on a touchscreen. It is a testament to a philosophy that valued the sensation of permanence over the excitement of the new. So, the mystery of the mirrored dashboard is finally solved. The Infiniti M30 was never really an Infiniti at all. It was the legendary Nissan Leopard, the hero of Abunai Deka, hastily dressed in a tuxedo and shipped to America to fight a war it was too old to win. Its outdated nature was actually its greatest strength. It remains a final, accidental export of pure 1980s Japanese optimism, a machine built to last forever, even if its future was canceled before it began. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy our videos.